On a gray April morning in 1900, a 53-foot iron vessel slipped beneath the surface of the Potomac River. No fanfare, no brass band. A handful of naval officers stood on the dock, arms crossed, expressions caught somewhere between skepticism and quiet dread. Below the waterline, a balding, bespectacled Irish immigrant named John Philip Holland sat inside a steel tube barely wider than a coffin, one hand on a lever controlling the diving planes, the other adjusting the trim valve. He was 59 years old. He had spent 27 years of his life, nearly half, trying to reach this moment. The vessel around him weighed 64 tons, carried a single 18-inch torpedo tube in the bow, and ran on a 45-horsepower electric motor that hummed with the steady vibration of a tuning fork struck once and held. The water closed over the conning tower. The last ripple vanished, and the age of underwater naval warfare began. Not with a battle, but with a quiet disappearance. Holland was not a soldier. He was not an engineer. By formal training. Born in 1841 in Liscannor, a small fishing village on the western coast of County Clare, Ireland, he grew up watching British warships patrol the Atlantic horizon like floating fortresses. His father was a Coast Guard officer in British service. His mother spoke Irish as her first language. The family lived modestly, caught between empires and tides. When famine gutted the region in the late 1840s, Holland's older brother died. His father followed soon after. The boy was left with poor eyesight, a talent for mathematics, and an abiding fury at the naval power that dominated his homeland's waters. He entered the Christian Brothers Order as a young man, teaching school in Limerick, Cork, and later in Drogheda. But his mind was never fully in the classroom. In the margins of his teaching notebooks, he sketched hull shapes. He studied buoyancy. He devoured every available text on pneumatics and hydrodynamics. By the time he emigrated to the United States in 1873, settling in Paterson, New Jersey at the age of 31, he carried with him no wealth, no connections, and no formal engineering credentials. What he carried was a design, hand-drawn on linen paper, for a vessel that could travel beneath the ocean's surface and strike an enemy warship from below. The idea was not new. Submarine concepts had circulated for centuries. David Bushnell's one-man turtle had attempted to attach explosives to a British ship during the American Revolution. The Confederate H.L. Hunley had managed to sink the USS Housatonic in 1864, then promptly sank itself, killing all 9 crew members aboard. Every submarine attempt before Holland shared the same fatal flaw. They were death traps, no reliable propulsion underwater. No way to control depth with precision. No means of sustaining a crew long enough to accomplish a mission and return alive. Holland understood the problem differently than his predecessors. He didn't see the submarine as a weapon first. He saw it as an engineering puzzle, a question of balancing 3 forces that fought each other constantly. Buoyancy, propulsion, and breathable air. Solve those 3 and the weapon would follow naturally. His first prototype, Holland Boat No. 1, launched in 1878. From the banks of the Passaic River, it was 14 feet long, powered by a small petroleum engine, and it sank to the riverbed on its maiden dive, not catastrophically, but deliberately. Holland climbed out through the hatch, soaking wet, grinning. The boat worked. It was crude, unstable, underpowered, but it submerged and resurfaced under the operator's control. That alone was a revolution. Funding came from the most unlikely of sponsors, the Fenian Brotherhood, an Irish-American organization dedicated to ending British rule in Ireland. Their leaders saw Holland's submarine as the great equalizer, a weapon that could neutralize the Royal Navy's dominance without matching it ship for ship. Between 1881 and 1883, the Fenians bankrolled 2 larger prototypes. The Fenian Ram, Holland's second major design, was 31 feet long, displaced 19 tons, and incorporated a pneumatic gun capable of firing a 6-foot projectile underwater. It worked. Witnesses watched it dive to 60 feet in New York Harbor and maneuver with surprising agility. But the partnership collapsed in disputes over money and control. The Fenians seized the Ram in a midnight raid on the boatyard, towing it across Long Island Sound. They couldn't operate it. Holland, disgusted, walked away from the project entirely. For nearly a decade, he worked in obscurity. He taught school. He drafted designs no one commissioned. He wrote letters to the Navy Department that went unanswered. The United States military establishment in the 1880s had no interest in submarines. They were considered toys, novelties, the obsession of cranks and dreamers. Holland was lumped in with perpetual motion enthusiasts and airship prophets. His proposals gathered dust. Then, in 1893, the Navy opened a design competition for a submarine torpedo boat. Holland submitted his plans and won. But the victory was hollow. The Navy insisted on modifications, surface-running torpedo launchers, steam propulsion systems, heavier armament that Holland knew would compromise the vessel's underwater performance. The result, the Plunger, was a bureaucratic disaster. Overweight, underpowered, and fundamentally misconceived, it never entered service. Holland watched his design, dismantled by committee and rebuilt into something that contradicted every principle he'd spent 2 decades developing. He made a decision that defined his legacy. Using his own funds and private investment through the Holland Torpedo Boat Company, he built the vessel. He actually wanted to build. No Navy interference, no design by committee, pure engineering, guided by 25 years of trial, failure, and refinement. The Holland 6 launched on May 17, 1897 from the Crescent Shipyard in Elizabethport, New Jersey. 53 feet 4 inches long, a maximum beam of 10 feet 3 inches, surface displacement 64 tons. It carried a single 18-inch torpedo tube forward and a Zelinsky dynamite gun, an 8-inch pneumatic cannon mounted in the bow. But the weapons were secondary. The genius was in the propulsion. For surface travel, a 45-horsepower auto-gasoline engine drove the boat at 8 knots while simultaneously charging a bank of 66 Exide storage cells. When the vessel submerged, the gasoline engine shut down. It consumed oxygen and produced carbon monoxide, both fatal in a sealed hull. Instead, a 75-horsepower electric motor drawing from those storage cells pushed the Holland 6 through the water at 5 knots submerged. This dual propulsion system, combustion engine on the surface, electric motor below, was Holland's great intellectual breakthrough. Every submarine built for the next 6 decades would follow this exact architecture. Depth control came through a combination of ballast tanks, diving planes mounted near the bow, and a fixed center of gravity that Holland had calculated through years of scale model testing. The boat could dive to 75 feet. It could stay submerged for approximately 4 hours at cruising speed. It surfaced by blowing compressed air into the ballast tanks, forcing water out and rising on restored buoyancy. The system was elegant, it was reliable, and it worked on the first dive. Navy observers were invited aboard. Captain John Lowe descended with Holland in the Potomac during a demonstration run in March 1900. The boat dove, maneuvered, fired a dummy torpedo, and surfaced, all within 90 minutes. Lowe emerged pale but convinced. His report to the Bureau of Construction stated, in language stripped of the usual naval caution, that the Holland 6 represented a practical weapon of war. On April 11, 1900, the United States Navy purchased the Holland 6 for $150,000. It was commissioned as USS Holland, designated SS-1, the first officially commissioned submarine in the history of the United States Navy. Holland was not present at the ceremony. He was already back in his workshop in New Jersey, drafting improvements. The irony cut deep. The Navy that had ignored him for 20 years, that had sabotaged his plunger design, that had dismissed submarines as impractical fantasies, now rushed to order 6 more boats based on his template. The Holland Torpedo Boat Company, reorganized as the Electric Boat Company, would go on to become the dominant submarine manufacturer in the Western world, building vessels through 2 world wars, the Cold War, and into the nuclear age. But Holland himself was steadily pushed out of his own company by financier Isaac Rice, who valued contracts over the inventor's perfectionism. By 1904, Holland had resigned. He held patents. He held no power. He spent his final years in Newark, New Jersey, working on aviation designs that never found backing. His eyesight, poor since childhood, continued to deteriorate. He died on August 12, 1914, at the age of 73, 2 weeks after the start of World War I, the very conflict that would prove, beyond all argument, the devastating effectiveness of the weapon he had created. German U-boats, built on principles Holland had pioneered, sank over 5,000 Allied ships during that war. They nearly starved Britain into submission. The submarine, once dismissed as a toy, had become the most feared weapon in naval warfare. And the template for every one of those U-boats, for every American fleet submarine at Midway, for every Soviet ballistic missile boat patrolling beneath Arctic ice, traces back to a 53-foot iron vessel built by a half-blind Irish schoolteacher in a New Jersey shipyard. Holland never saw it. He never needed to. He had known since Liscannor, or since watching those British warships on the horizon, that the ocean was not a wall, it was a door. He spent his life building the key,